Hi, everyone. I have no idea what Sergio just said, so I hope it was nice. I forgot my flicker. Sorry, can someone grab that? It's a very good start. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so yesterday we had a fantastic opening session by Gunther Pauli, which was really quite scary, but exciting, invigorating as well. The one thing that stuck with me is that Gunther said, less bad is just not good enough right now. We can't just keep trying to be slightly better than our peers or slightly better than last year. But of course, that raises the question, how much is enough? What exactly do we have to do on all the major environmental and social issues? If you work within a company, what does your company have to do? That's what the Future Fit Business Benchmark tries to answer. So I'll be talking about that this morning, briefly. But first, let's reflect on where we are. Humanity has done some absolutely amazing things. This is a photograph of Shanghai in China 30 years ago, and then 5 years ago. So only 25 years difference. We have a pretty incredible ability to change the world around us. But of course, some of the impacts we have aren't predictable at all. Does anyone want to shout out, guess what this is? Come on. Any guesses? A nest? So this is a nest that was found on a roof of a building in Tokyo, a crow's nest, where the crows had innovated because there weren't enough twigs and branches from trees around. They'd actually started stealing coat hangers from people's washing lines to use for the structure for their nest, which is ingenious of the crows, but it's actually also pretty depressing, right? Here's another example. Anyone guess what that is? Bit louder?
Banana.
Yeah, so honeycomb, okay? So this is the beekeepers in this particular field in the south of France pulled this honeycomb out of a beehive a couple of years ago, found all these crazy colors. They don't show up particularly well on the projector, but there's oranges and blues and greens. And they wonder what the hell was going on. How did their honey turn out with these day-glow colors? And it turns out the bees had found a much more efficient source of energy than flowers. They'd found the waste behind a M&M's factory a few miles away. Now, the harvest was ruined because unless you're 5 years old, you don't want to put that on your toast in the morning. Okay. Another example. That's the contents of the stomach of one dead seabird that was found. And in fact, it's projected that there will be more plastic in the sea than fish by 2050, by weight. And of course, it's not just about the natural world, it's about society too. This photograph, when I first saw it, I thought it was 100 years old. It looks like the start of the Industrial Revolution. But this is actually Beijing 2 years ago. Okay, look at that air pollution. Air pollution, last year air pollution killed 5.5 million people prematurely. This is Sao Paulo. We see similar situations of social inequality with just fences between the haves and the have-nots in cities all over the world. This is a group of people trying to get to Europe from Syria. We all know about the problems in Syria. What's often not talked about is what started this. Now, there have been problems with the Assad regime for ages in Syria, for many years. But what tipped it over the edge a couple of years ago? Well, actually, it's more extreme weather brought on by climate change, which caused the harvests to fail in all the rural areas of Syria. So everyone moved to the city, and the population of the capital of Syria doubled in a year. That had a pressure cooker effect And of course, we are where we are today. So even things like climate change are already starting to affect us hugely. This is a video that always freaks me out when I see it. It's easy to talk about statistics doing what we do. It's easy to talk about the numbers. You sometimes can't get your head around the numbers. But one of our biggest challenges is fresh water and the amount of fresh water we need for agriculture, energy generation, and so forth. If you take all of the water in the world, put it in a ball, it looks like that. Okay? But that's all the water. What we need, what most life needs, is fresh water. That's the fresh water. Okay? But most of that is locked up in glaciers, permafrost in the Arctic region, and so on. The available fresh water is that. Now, you don't have to look at the numbers to understand that that little dot is quite a lot smaller than that big ball over there. And we're going to be joined by another 2 billion people over the next few decades. That's starting to look like a resource that we've got to be very careful how we manage. We saw a variation of this slide yesterday. Scientists have just, a couple of weeks ago, voted on creating a new era in the history books called the Anthropocene. Basically, all the eras in history, mainly geological, have now been joined by this new one, which starts around 1950, which is when there is a very noticeable record in the natural world of humans' effects on the planet. It's also been called the Great Acceleration. Basically, on every meaningful social and environmental measure, we're now hitting the limits of what the planet and society can take. We need to do things differently. Okay? We need to do things very differently. Excuse me. And we heard yesterday from Ernesto talking about hacking culture. We can do things differently. He gave some fantastic examples of young people who are thinking about problems in a completely different way. We also heard about the possibilities for innovation with the story from Leonardo about New York 120 years ago, when New York was covered in horse shit, basically, before the invention of the motor car. Actually, it's amazing to think how far the Americans have come. Because 120 years ago, New York was covered in horse shit. Wind the clock forward to today, and Donald Trump has managed to cover the entire country in bullshit. So I guess that's innovation at scale, I suppose. But thank you. So seriously, though, we need to rethink how we do and how we value business. Business exists. Solly from Futuro asked us yesterday, why does your business exist? Why does business exist? Well, business should exist to serve the needs of society, meet the needs of society. The traditional way we thought about business and the triple bottom line of financial, environmental, and social performance is like this. It's like a Venn diagram of overlapping circles. This gives a distorted picture. It makes it look like business and society and environment are more or less independent, but they overlap a little bit. So we end up thinking in terms of creating shared value. If I'm in business, I can do what I've always done, but I need to look at the intersection between what I'm doing and what the environment needs and what society needs, and I can focus a little bit on that, and I can call it shared value. Well, that's not good enough. Doing less bad is not good enough. We need to rethink things. And to rethink things, we need to take a systems view. And we need to understand that business actually is completely dependent. To thrive, business is completely dependent on a healthy society. It's kind of obvious when you say it. If you don't have customers and people to work for you and so forth, there's not much you can do. But society as a whole can only be healthy if the planet is capable of supporting our needs, if we live within the carrying capacity of the Earth's natural processes. So we don't need to go away from the idea of the triple bottom line. Business does need to pay attention to the environmental, social, and financial bottom lines. The problem is we haven't been thinking about the triple bottom line in the right way. We need to take a systems view. We need to rethink how we look at that environmental and social performance. We can't just focus on being less bad, but how much is enough? Well, we need a new kind of benchmark to measure progress, not towards best practice, but required practice, starting from a systems science. And the reason is this. Typically, we measure social and environmental performance of business in one of three ways. Relative to a past year. This is where a company says, we've reduced our water use by 10% since the year 2000. Okay. What were you doing in year 2000? Did you leave your taps running? How do I know how good you are? How do I know what that actually means? Doesn't tell me anywhere near what I need to understand where you're going, whether your purpose is to truly do good in the world or if you're just focused on making money. Second approach is to compare companies with their peers, with other companies in the sector. Now every CEO wants to know how he's doing or she is doing relative to the other companies in their space. Of course they do. Investors need to know that. Of course they do. But if you just focus on best practice, you miss the overall context. So we get crazy situations where we get these so-called sustainability ratings and rankings and metrics and indexes, like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Some of you may have come across this. It announced its results last week for what are supposedly the most sustainable companies in the world, and an oil company scored 87%. Now, what's it telling the CEO of that oil company and the investors in that oil company about the need to transition their business model away from being so carbon intensive? 87% sounds fantastic to me. And the problem, of course, is if we only compare oil companies against other oil companies, we miss the greater context. The third way we measure performance is relative to goals that companies set themselves. If the companies set themselves the right and ambitious goals, that's great. But all too often, companies just set a goal and publish a goal that they know they're going to hit anyway, based on efficiency initiatives and so forth. So none of these things tell us enough about where a company is and where it's going. How much is a company actually living up to its stated purpose? So what we need is to define the required break-even state for business. What do I mean by that? Well, if we think of the triple bottom line, which we've probably all heard of, that companies need to pay attention to the financial, environmental, and social performance, the only bottom line we've actually ever defined is the financial one. We know that the minimum a company needs to do in the long term is break even, is make as much money as it spends. Okay? Your investors aren't going to tolerate you for long if you make a loss. Right? What we're doing with sustainability right now is nuts. It's like the financial equivalent of a company saying, we're fantastic. We lost $100 million last year, but everybody else lost $105 million. We're great. That's not good enough. When it comes to environmental and social performance, we need to understand what the break-even point is so we can understand which companies are actually helping our transition to a sustainable future rather than hindering it. That's what the Future Fit Business Benchmark is all about. Solly from Futera gave us a fantastic framework to think about this yesterday, about purpose. And on the one side, you've got logic, and on the other, you've got magic. Logic is around the vision and the maps. Where is it you're going, and where are you now? How can you chart a course to get there? And then the stories and the symbols on the magic side are how do you engage people around that? And the Future Fit Business Benchmark is all around that logic side. It's the vision and the map. Where are you now and where are you going? And it starts with a definition, simple definition, that a future fit business is one that creates value while in no way undermining and ideally increasing the possibility that humans and other life will flourish on Earth forever. So this is not about utopia. This is just about understanding this break-even point that every company needs to reach, no matter what its size, no matter what its sector. Question, of course, is how would we know when a company is future fit? And how can we tell how far away a business is from reaching that destination? So that's what the Future Fit Business Benchmark's all about. It measures progress towards a desired future state, rather than relative to where everyone is today. It's grounded in science. You can only define what this future break-even point looks like if you understand the system conditions within which society would need to operate for it to be sustainable. It's designed to be as simple as possible to use, including being understandable by the average CEO. There's a lot of science behind it, but that doesn't mean you have to use scientific language to explain it. And it's completely free to use. So we're a non-profit. We're building this with a lot of help from other organizations as a public good that anyone is free to download and use today. Okay. I'm going to talk very briefly about how we've built this. So the starting point is thinking of the Earth as a system. We didn't have to do this hard work because a group of scientists about 28 years ago started this process, led by a cancer surgeon in Sweden. So this guy, Karl-Henrik Robert, lovely man, who's very supportive of what we're doing with the benchmark, was a cancer surgeon. And patients used to come to him and say, you know, I've got this symptom, I've got this headache or whatever. And of course, he didn't just look at the area of the symptom to diagnose the problem. He looked at the body as a system. And as he learned more about the environmental movement, he realized we weren't treating the Earth as a system to understand our impacts on the planet and society. So he got a group of scientists together to define and build this framework for strategic sustainable development, which starts with 4 system conditions. There's actually 8, but the social one is kind of 5 subconditions. And there they are. Now, we won't dwell on this, given that I've only got 4 minutes left. But the idea here is that these are the kind of boundary conditions within which society would need to operate to ensure the possibility that humans and other life can flourish on Earth forever. Okay. Now, they're quite academic, and they're quite high level. Put that in front of your average CEO, and they're not really going to understand, well, what does that mean to me? So what we did is we started with those system conditions, and we thought, well, how would a typical company need to operate to ensure it adheres to those conditions? Well, you might say there is no such thing as a typical company. Every company is different, and of course it is. But there are some things you can say about every company that are true. So every company has employees, has customers, produces some kind of goods or services which it sells to those customers. Every company relies on some level of physical resource, even if it's only energy and water. Every company has suppliers and so on. So what we did is we started with the system conditions from those scientists back that they've been developing over the last 28 years. We mapped them onto all the global challenges we face today to see how, if we're living within the system conditions, we start to solve these problems rather than make them worse. We translated the system conditions forward into business principles. These system conditions are for society as a whole, but what do they mean to an individual company? So we translated them to business principles. But then from there, we translated those into future fit goals. So we've defined the social and environmental break-even point for business in terms of 2021 future fit goals that every company ultimately needs to reach. Finally, we created a set of key fitness indicators which measure progress toward each of those goals. So companies can actually understand how far away they are from where they need to be and measure progress towards it. The final step, which we're working on an ongoing basis, is we're helping companies understand how the pursuit of future fitness helps them with all the other initiatives out there. There's so much guidance that companies are expected to understand and deal with. So for example, the SDGs we heard about a little bit yesterday. If you pursue future fitness, we've got a very clear mapping to show you how this enables you as a business to contribute to the SDGs and make sure you're not undermining them. Likewise, the circular economy, which we're going to hear about in a little while. If you pursue the future fit goals, you will become aligned with the circular economy. So very briefly, the key point with this is a tool for companies themselves to use. This is not a rating where you have to fill in questionnaires and you get back a magic score. This is designed for you to use yourselves as a management tool to measure your progress. If you do want to publish your future fit scores, We're working with some of the world's biggest auditing companies to develop an assurance process so they can go in and check what you've done so that you can then publish your scores, just as you do with your financial accounts today. Release 1 came out in May after 2.5 years of public consultation, public drafts with experts, and that measures progress toward this break-even point, this kind of do-no-harm state. Here's a few examples of our future fit goals. Release 2, which we're working on now, is planned for Q1 of next year. And this extends things beyond the break-even point. Because we need to ensure a sustainable future. Every business in the world needs to become future fit. But of course, just reaching break-even isn't the full story. A lot of companies have a big positive impact in certain areas, healthcare companies and so on. We've heard from some great examples here yesterday about this. So the benchmark will also measure all of the ways a company can create system value, increasing the future fitness of others within the system. I've got a red light here, so I need to really wrap up. One of the first companies that's embraced this with an ambition to become the most socially and environmentally responsible company in the world is The Body Shop. You can download their latest sustainability report and find their core commitments and how they align back to the future fit goals. Summarizing, the benchmark is designed to empower business leaders to plan for the long term, to think beyond current best practice and incrementally shuffling forward from the unsustainable status quo and start thinking about this destination, this North Star, to guide them. It also inspires and rewards true leadership. So by measuring the true gap between where companies are and where they need to be, we do start to see the true leaders emerge. Also helps companies align with all this guidance out there around the SDGs and other initiatives. And because we have these indicators to help measure the gap between where you are now and where you need to be, it gives you actionable insight on how to prioritize your actions to become future fit. Finally, it puts purpose in context. You could have a fantastic statement of purpose. And as Solly said yesterday, there are a lot of great purpose statements out there that actually people aren't really living up to it. You've got to pursue this purpose. You can put your purpose in context by understanding how what you're trying to do in the world delivers value while in no way undermining the transition to a sustainable future, and ideally helping it. Final thought. This is our definition of a future fit business. Think about, just as a thought exercise, think about what's the purpose of your business and what would it mean for you to insert that purpose here, and also think, but ensuring that you're doing nothing to undermine the possibility that life flourishes on Earth forever. You can go and download the benchmark now from futurefitbusiness.org. Please get in touch with me if you want to talk about this further. Thank you very much.